getting warm. I decided to move bricks outdoors in the afternoon heat yesterday and decided that was a really stupid idea. But, that's how it goes. Not too smart sometimes. Josh has agreed to lead us in opening prayer so we can begin this morning.
Dear God, Father in heaven, we are so thankful for this wonderful day that you've blessed us with and for this opportunity for us to spend time together, to strengthen and to encourage one another. I ask you, please be with Greg, that he has a ready recollection of the things that he has prepared as we're covering some difficult topics. We ask you to help us to look for ways that we can strive to help each other, to encourage each other, and to know that you are there for us to seek help and guidance from. We're so thankful for this family that we have here and for this opportunity that we have to worship you today. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Glad to see one back after a harrowing fall, and things are going well. Looks like you've got family with you today, so pleased that things are turning out well. I said last class period we talk about self-harm a little bit. This is probably something you've had some experience with, again, in your family, maybe yourself, maybe a coworker. We'll look at the aspects of this a little bit and try to understand how to be supportive and sympathetic for someone who is engaging in this kind of malbehavior. It's got an interesting perspective these days from the community that looks at mental wellness, and I want to share some of those things because I think it'll help us understand a little bit. And I did talk to our professionals dealing in that area and asked them to please help, support, and elaborate. I'll just give the mic to you guys, let you teach. But self-harm typically involves injuring oneself by actions such as cutting or burning or picking at wounds or pulling out hair or inflicting bruises. Now, we had a joke in our house when the kids were little. Hannah loved Band-Aids, especially if they were character Band-Aids. And she would find some way to go out of her way to make something bleed so that she could get a Band-Aid. But she was really good at skinning up her knees anyway. I know we put a new pair of jeans on Hannah one time. She was 3 years old, and she had the knee torn out and blown out in 15 minutes of putting on a new pair of jeans. And we said, that's Hannah. But she loved Band-Aids. And so she'd go to Mommy, I need a Band-Aid, I need a Band-Aid. And we would look and say, okay, you get a Band-Aid. You couldn't even see any spot. But that's not what we're talking about. This is behavior that can endanger one's health or safety. And it can also involve things that are outside of these ideas of cutting or bruising or injuring the body by engaging in dangerous behaviors. And that can be alcohol or substances or dangerous activities. It can be neglecting one's physical or emotional needs. Self-harm is not the same as suicidal ideation or attempts to commit suicide. Suicidal ideation means you have thoughts of ending your own life. Obviously, an attempt is to carry that thought into action. But this falls short of that, and it's dealing with specific anxieties within the person. And I said I would maybe ask these guys to just share a little bit some of their experiences with those who are engaging in that kind of behaviors, if you wouldn't mind. Jesse, would you like to kick us off?
Where would you like me to start?
Whatever you think is appropriate for us to hear.
Sorry about it. There are so many. I have patients. I would say about 3/4 of my patients that come through have SINHI, which is suicidal ideations and homicidal ideations.
Wow.
A lot of them want to harm themselves to either feel pain to escape other types of pain,
Okay, let's talk about this idea of self-soothing a little bit. My limited knowledge says the body can release natural painkillers, endorphins, as a result of injury in order to, calm the nervous system and not go into shock, and all kinds of good reasons why the body does that. But when it's emotional pain that one is trying to mask or conceal or forget about or overwhelm with the physical pain, it's the person's attempt to self-soothe. They're trying to find a way to break from that constant emotional anxiety that they're experiencing. And so that the behavior is in itself explanatory from that standpoint. It makes sense in a perverted way that a person would go to the extremes of harming themselves physically in order to be covering an emotional hurt.
I like the way you said it makes sense. It doesn't make sense to us,
Right.
but it makes sense to them.
Right.
Well, and trying to find that control, because if your emotions are out of control, that is one thing that you can control. I will control it by cutting myself.
Mm-hmm. I think that's another important understanding of this, is a person who feels like they've lost control of their thoughts and their emotions is looking for some way to regain control of their person. And so by going to the extent of harming themselves, creating that endorphin situation, but also just taking their mind off of their emotional hurt and emotional void, if that's what it is, it makes sense to them. I think it's one that clearly doesn't make sense to us. We don't understand it. Yes, sir.
I was just going to say, I don't know that it always makes sense to them in the realm of rationality
Exactly.
or logic, but they know that this behavior makes them feel less of the behavior they don't want, the pain that they don't want to feel. So they associate the two things as this helps me with this. It may not make sense to me. It may not be logical. It's not rational. I don't like it, but it helps. And so I do it because it helps me. Same way people use drugs and alcohol and hate themselves afterwards because of the other problems that it causes. But in the moment, this drug makes me not feel that, which is so overwhelmingly painful that I'll go that route. And so, there's some sense in which it doesn't necessarily make sense to them, but it does provide the desired results.
It makes sense enough that it's a repetitive behavior, but that doesn't mean it's not without regrets. There are behaviors we can engage in that are either sinful or just things we know that aren't good for us, that are repetitive behavior. You may have regrets, we may have regrets later, but we are then enticed to continue that process. I know there's one guy in the room that likes salty snacks, and he talks about salty snacks, and he plans on salty snacks, and he knows where he can go in town and get the best salty snacks, and he knows that's not what he really needs, but he won't make eye contact with me either as I'm talking about him. But again, not to the extent of causing physical harm, but we can have a tendency to do that ourselves. Do something that makes us feel soothed, makes us feel better. We know it's not a best practice, but we do it. We have regrets. We say, I need to cut back on that, or I need to put that out of my life altogether. But this is, again, different. The one thing I keep wanting us to understand about some of these aspects of mental wellness is they may be similar to things that we experience. But as Brace was talking to me weeks ago, they're not the same thing. They have a familiarity to behavior that we may engage in, but they're not the same thing in that, in this case, folks are carrying this to an extreme that is causing them to burn themselves, pull out their hair, something that is, far beyond maybe having a poor diet choice once in a while. I love soft serve ice cream. The kids would retire me. We'd go for a trip somewhere, and I'd say every time I saw one of the little mom and pop stands, it wouldn't have to be a Dairy Queen or anything. It's a little mom and pop ice cream, and they're all over the place. I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop and get a cone. And they got like, oh yeah, Dad, keep driving. They got tired of me, and they didn't even want to stop for a cone. They got tired of me talking about it. But I know ice cream's not the best for me, but I love it.
Well, you brought up at least twice now the idea of food. Food can be a form of self-harm.
Sure can.
Like you said, the person that you were referring to likes salty snacks because he enjoys those, and you like ice cream. But it's not the same as someone who has an eating disorder where they either eat too little or eat too much in order to soothe themselves from the other pain that they're experiencing in their lives. I mean, there are programs on television, My 600-Pound Life, with people who, and I say what you want about reality TV, but there are people who are hurting so badly out there in the world that they eat themselves to the point that they can't get out of bed. They're immobile, and that is a form of self-harm.
Sure.
We don't like to talk about gluttony and overeating because sometimes we like to do the same thing, but it's not the same thing, and that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's,
There's a lot of illness, I'll call it, that go hand in hand. Hoarding.
Yeah,
Mentioned
there you go.
hoarding. I did a lot of study just recently for a particular situation that I'm involved in. That I just looked up, was 10 types of hoarding. One of them was food hoarding, not the type of food hoarding that you think of gathering food. It's eating food. Some stress will happen in their lives. So in order for them to get through it, they eat themselves. And especially bad if a person is a diabetic, because they will literally eat themselves into a 600, 700, or 1,000 blood sugar ketoacidosis. And anything and everything, if it's not kept within common measures where you and I would have it, they take it to excess. Forgot where I was going. But they take it to excess. Anything can be taken to excess. But they have, what's the term I'm looking for?
Moderation.
Moderation, thank you. They take things beyond what they should take in moderation. And it's anything and everything can be done that way.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I never associated self-harm with hoarding as a form of soothing. But, dealing with my mother, I knew that having her possessions packed all around her, as she did, was a way of making her feel safer. And I never could understand what the danger was. But she would hand a used paper towel to Allison and say, "Throw this away, I can't throw anything away." And it was pretty much the truth. She just couldn't throw things away. And people say, "Oh, she grew up in depression," and she was born in 1934, and her dad was a school teacher, one of the best jobs in town at the time, steady work, and they were, I would call, middle class Americans. So she wasn't in a situation of extreme need or poverty to where one might justify keeping things because you just might need them someday, or they're place more value on material things. It was junk. It was garbage in many cases that was just accumulated, but it created a safe zone for her. And I had these conversations with my mother. I said, "We've got to keep your house open I said, first of all, if you fall and break a hip, emergency crews can't even get here to extract you. But I said, also, if you get hurt or break a hip or something, we've immediately got to remove you from the house because you can't navigate this house with a walker or a wheelchair. It's impossible. And everything I tried to motivate her to give up on some of that tendency didn't make sense to her, and I was never really very successful in that. And so we would try to keep her maintained in the midst of chaos. She had probably over 20 1- and 2-cup measures in the house because she'd lose them in the kitchen or they'd be dirty, and she'd just go buy another one instead of dealing with what she had, and which just increased the hoard and just increased the volume, and it was insanity as far as I was concerned. And that's kind of where we go with this. Let's not be so quick to judge people as out of their minds when there are justifications for behaviors like this that, again, are in the moment rational to them that are completely irrational to us. And we have to engage with that, but we have to have, some compassion for that as well. Yes?
One of the things that I know we're touching on hoarding a little bit, a lot of people don't realize, and I had to learn this because, well, you with your mother, me with my mother, hoarding is a form of mental illness, and I didn't even realize that until I had gotten into it so deep and trying to figure out what was going on of what it was. And a lot of people, when they showed up with those TV shows on hoarders, they never explained it like it was a mental illness.
Mhm.
They just said, "Oh, this person's just collecting," but they don't realize just in 10 types of hoarding that I have run across, that and every one of them says it's something that happened from something in the past that
Mhm.
caused a mental breakdown or a mental handicap.
When you say 10 kinds of hoarding, I'm assuming you mean 10 motivations or 10
There's 10 types of hoarding.
10 varieties of how it manifests itself.
Object, food, animals, trash, just to name a few.
Okay. Or just general category. A little all of the above
The
sometimes.
general category is actually just the object.
Yeah.
Well, and the bottom line with people who are in danger is to keep them safe and helping them to say, hey, this isn't healthy. I love you anyway, but I have to take out the trash. In our Ladies' Day discussion, making sure that when we would go visit someone older, this can of sardines that's been sitting in the refrigerator for a year can get thrown away.
Now you're getting personal here. Watch it. You've not seen my refrigerator.
Keep them safe, and then I know, and if they are in need of help, to give them the help, but when they are anxious, letting them know, hey, instead of buying another cat or buying more food, let's go do something. Let's go someplace else, pray about it, read some scriptures, keeping them safe, contacting their doctor if need be, that type of thing. But making sure that just telling them I love you is important. I don't feel very loved right now. Why? Because I need another cat. Well, you don't need another cat. You need to be loved more or prayed for more or that type of thing. And medication does help with that extreme anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah. Margaret?
I have a friend who has the mental illness problem of compulsive buying, just buying whatever. But hers is the double whammy. Not only does she want to buy, she wants to keep. So that one mental illness of the compulsive spender or buyer is one thing, but when
Yeah.
Setting firm limits, again, putting that money in the account is a great way of setting firm limits.
My mother's house was right behind a shopping center from 1964 forward. Many of you know Wildwood Lane, been there. Not recently. Some of you have been there recently. But there were always a bunch of garbage bins right outside her door that gave her ample material to collect from. And she ended up with all kinds of things in the house, and I thought, where in the world? Oh, never mind. I know where that came from. Goodwill was positioned back there for a while, and they throw out their donations that they don't sell after a while. And so you talk about bizarre items showing up in the house. But it was part, again, of this compulsive behavior that I again don't want to be in the business trying to diagnose, but I do think that it's important that there are people and there are resources that can diagnose what is the underlying emotional pain that is going on here to create such behavior. Margaret's not a hoarder, she's a collector. We want to make a strong distinction there because Margaret's home is very well put together, and now it's got a lot of things in it, but she has narrowed her collections to certain objects and certain plants, and she enjoys that, and it's not a hindrance to her life, it's not a hindrance to her finances, and some of them are quite interesting. The Jell-O collection is the one that still strikes me as the most interesting of items to collect. But the point is, we can help people look for more positive ways to divert themselves from that emotional pain. And it may be even identifying to the individual what it is they're trying to escape from. That may be part of the issue. Any other thoughts on what we've been talking about so far? So I mentioned the endorphins are the natural painkillers released by the brain, which can create a sense of emotional release or a numbing effect, as was mentioned. Because physical and emotional pain activates the same parts of the brain, those endorphins may bring emotional relief immediately following a self-harming behavior. For this reason, self-harm typically occurs in response to severe stress or psychological pain. Ephesians 5:29 comes to mind in talking about this conversation. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it just as Christ does the church. And talking about how if you love someone as you would your own body, you would do everything you can to make sure no pain happens, to make sure that everything is in the best interest of that individual. And here we've been talking about those that don't behave in that way, don't think in that way, don't use the kind of emotional release that others might that are more positive. And you can Harriet mentioned being with other people, getting out of yourself, getting out of your own environment, doing for other people. There's just lots of ways to find ways to be a distraction from that emotional harm. But there's also times to face it and just deal with it and just own up to it and work through the pain and try to find ways to get past what is in the past. So I said, this is behavior that is not inconsistent with what it says in Ephesians 5:29. For no one has ever hated their own flesh. They are, in fact, looking to bring relief from pain. It's just an unhealthy expression of it, an unhealthy expression of self-care. High-risk behaviors do that as well. Taking unnecessary risk, having extreme danger behaviors, you know, it can take all kind of forms of things that bring a lot of risk. Drugs and alcohol are two that come to mind, the easiest probably. So find the underlying source of trauma in the past or the present, and then create a safe place to escape that trauma and work on behavior modification tools to incentivize positive self-care to replace the self-harm. It's about the best we can do. And again, use a professional as well. I hope in this whole past 4 or 5 weeks, what we've also established is trying to just eliminate the stigma behind all of this. Whatever the emotional harm is, or whatever the poor self behaviors are, however we are using unhealthy ways to manifest what's going on inside of our hearts, what's going on inside of our minds, I want us to feel comfortable with saying that professional help can help. We've got 2 individuals here that dedicate themselves to working in that arena. Professional help can help, and we should be able to seek that out as well. Yes, sir.
You know, along with that, an understanding heart, like what you mentioned, they always give me the veterans for a very specific reason. And the reason they give me the veterans is a lot of times a veteran will only reach out to another veteran.
Mm.
Sometimes people just want to be heard. They just need somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
And sometimes we need to be that ear. It doesn't matter if it's us who work in the hospital environment like that, or their best friend, or somebody they know that they trust. Just to sit down and listen to them, a lot of times will help. And a lot of times they don't get that because people don't know how to react. And the reason I brought it up with the veterans is veterans, people that were in the military, who've been in combat, who've been in situations in general, they will only talk to somebody who's been in a similar situation. So they feel comfortable talking to a person of that capacity. And there's a lot of misunderstanding with certain situations because they don't know how to reach out. And we, as Christians and as people with ears and understanding, to be that ear, because we may be able to reach out and not only convert them, but also to reach out and help them emotionally.
Yeah, I mean, the family of Christ is to be an instrument in, we talked about loneliness recently, in a lot of aspects of what we're dealing with. We can't necessarily make it better, but as you said, just being heard. I even learned as a tax collector that if I went into an audit that was somewhat hostile or resentment I felt just from the room, and of course no one loves the tax auditor coming to visit their business, that one of the first things I would try to do is just give them a chance to vent and talk about how ridiculous this all is, and rail on the government for a little while, and oh yeah, you're right, it's just overreach, and if I let them get that out and get it out of their system, I invariably, with very few exceptions, I ended up having a very positive experience with them, and they were comfortable with me looking through their books, and their anxiety levels came down. But it was just hearing them out initially that just took the edge off of everything. Joy?
Two things. We talked about kind of directing them to someone who can help. I'm hoping that maybe we can have a available to us, for those of us who don't have an idea of where they might be able to find some help. The second thing is that even with professional help, it may not be a quick one and done type thing. It may be ongoing,
Sure.
depending on the injury, and depending on the type of person it is.
No, there's probably not, if anyone has gone to the extent of harming themselves to escape their past feelings or their current feelings about their past, there's probably not a quick fix for any of this. And it will take those resources. There are those resources. I thought about how to put together a list and kind of share that with. I did some digging around as to what's available, and I hope to still talk about that a little bit. And maybe we'll put a list together of some things and throw it in the bulletin too. If people are interested in seeing a list like that. But there are folks in the community that are trying to address this.
Well, I know immediately if someone does, they're like, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna cut myself because I'm feeling stressed out. I would say, stop, put this on your wrist, rubber band, flicking it. You're not hurting yourself, it's gonna hurt, but diversion, choose some ice, that type of thing. You wanna get that, if there's an immediate, wait, it's happening right now, divert it so the injury does not happen.
Okay.
Get outside, snap your wrist, go ahead, hit the ball against the wall, hard, hit, that type of thing. So getting them out of that immediate situation to safety, but they still want to release somehow. So there's that flicking, there's lots of distractions to do so they can still release but not get hurt.
All right, I appreciate that. Anything else? Yes.
Willingness to be transparent with each other is helpful too, because as Jesse was pointing out about veterans, they prefer to talk to someone that they feel like understands their situation on a personal level because they've experienced it. There are people in the church who have experienced all of these different things that we've talked about.
Right.
And for variations of self-harm, whether it's drugs or alcoholism or sexual promiscuity, or all kinds of different things that people struggle with. And there are people who have gone through that, and on some level perhaps are still going through that. We talk about recovering alcoholics, that you're always an alcoholic and you're recovering, and same can be true of a lot of these behaviors. It is a daily battle, a continuous battle to overcome it. And it can be helpful to know who the people are among us who have experienced some of those kinds of things and are willing to share with people. And while they won't understand exactly what you're going through, they at least have been there before, and they understand on a level that people like me who haven't struggled with some of those things can't understand. And that can be helpful. It may not be the solution, it may not be the fix-all, but it can be helpful to know someone else. You're not a weirdo. There's nothing. There's something wrong, but no more than something wrong with my physical body when I've got an infection or cancer. It's with my mind, yes, but there are other people who've gone through that, and so you're not unique from that perspective, and that can be very helpful, refreshing.
Yeah, and it's not the kind of thing we're going to put on the
No.
get to know your brethren. Here are my mental illnesses.
Yeah, these people struggle with.
But I've listed some of mine for you, and I've had actually positive responses from many who say, knowing that you are dealing with this has helped me. But the only way we're going to do this is get to know one another.
Absolutely.
It's the only way we're going to do this. I saw a hand over here. Yes.
Well, communication is key, and the problem is anybody that has problems usually doesn't want to ask for help.
Right.
And is afraid to ask for help.
That's why they're doing other things.
Exactly.
That's why we're turning to these unhealthy behaviors, is because We feel like we're the only one. We feel like we're isolated. We feel, and we do isolate ourselves to add to that feeling. But you got to come back to God is with us. You got to come back to God is with us, and you got to come back to, and God's people are with us too. God's people are with us too. We are here for one another. And it's great to have a Bible study, and it's great to have a cookout, and it's great to have times to visit and socialize. But ultimately, the family is more than a social diversion. We're not a club. We are not a club. That is not the purpose of the Lord's church. We are a place for broken people to be together to try to get to heaven. That is our purpose. Yes. Competing with your mother, so she'll get you later.
May I read a story really quick?
Sure.
Okay. She was drowning and nobody noticed. Nobody except her. It was June 2022 at the World Championships in Budapest. Anita Alvarez, an American artistic swimmer with Mexican roots, was performing a flawless routine. But when her performance ended, she didn't come up for air. She had lost consciousness. Her body floated for a few seconds, then began to sink, slowly, all the way to the bottom of the pool. The audience didn't notice, neither did the judges. Everyone was clapping. But her coach, Andrea Fuentes, noticed. She knew Anita, knew exactly how long it took her to surface. She felt in her heart that something was wrong. Without thinking twice, she dove in. She swam straight down, grabbed Anita by the waist, and brought her back up. She saved her life. This story left me thinking, who knows you well enough to know when you're not okay, even if you're still smiling? Who would dive in for you without hesitation when you no longer have the strength to come up for air? And more importantly, would you be that person for someone else? And I mean, I just think that we need to think about that often. Like, who do we know, and who knows us well enough to know when something's not right?
And are we willing to dive into the deep end of the pool to save them? Because that implies some responsibility and getting wet, if nothing else. In other words, getting your hands on it, being part of it. Joy?
So that was going to be my second point. Something related to what she said is that someone that you know, like, not just everybody can handle what you're getting ready to say. Like, if you've got a big issue, you don't want to go to one of the teenagers and tell them about it.
Right.
You still have to have some caution about who. You don't tell everybody. It's not broadcast. And then the first thing was, what Brace was talking about with the transparency. I think that speaks of the success of Al-Anon with sponsors and things like that. That transparency is what helps that person to stay sober, and because they know they can relate, and they know when they're, pulling one over and when they're really genuine. So I think that transparency, that AA speaks well. Their success speaks well in the transparency thing and the accountability.
Being the father of a household with 4 kids, I sometimes felt like there was a whole communication network going on that I was never tapping into. Dad was the last to know sometimes, or it felt that way sometimes. But the kids went to each other, or they went to mom, or they came to me. It depended on the situation. And I always said if it involved money or cars, they came to me. And then pretty much everything else, they went to mom first. Samantha, do you have a comment?
Kind of go back to what Ashley was reading. I think it goes to being observant, and which Greg already pointed out I'm freakishly good at, unfortunately sometimes for some people. But being observant and knowing, like I said, if you know somebody pretty well and they're not seeming right, they're probably not going to come out unless they really trust you and tell you that. And so you're going to have to, there are cases I think where you would have to reach out to them.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. You have to poke and prod a little bit sometimes, and you have to know when to back off. But again, I think the very reaching out, and I said this about loneliness, invite people to go with you when you know they're going to say no. Because at least you're signaling to them that you are aware of their being alone and their loneliness, and you want to be a source for them to help alleviate that. And if they're going to tell you no, that's their business. You can't force them. but you can do the outreach, and you can let them know that you care and that you are concerned about them, and tell them you're praying for them too. I can tell you, I've had so many people tell me, I'm praying for you, and it's made such a great difference. Yes, Ethan.
I was thinking about the transparency idea, and I think part of the importance of that, especially if it's something that you've dealt with, is you're showing the person the solution based on being open and vulnerable. This is what worked for me, and this is how Christ influenced things for the better and helped me to heal. And sometimes people just need to see the hope and see what can I do. And I think in addition to all the other things that we're talking about with transparency, I think transparency is part of that, is showing them the solution.
Yeah. Yes.
I'll tell you what, I've been on the other side of this, and you don't want people to know, and you hide. And you put up a facade, and you don't let anybody see the real you, because you can't.
No, if you cut yourself, you wear long sleeves, and you do things to keep people from seeing. I've got a big mess I made in my arm yesterday, which was not self-harm, it was clumsiness. And so I'm wearing long sleeves, so you don't have to look at my big bloody wound.
Go along with what's been said, I use in a lot of my groups that, okay, you're stuck in a hole that's 10 is 20 foot deep, it's barely big enough for you to be in, you don't know how to get out of there. The next thing you know, somebody jumps in there with you, and you're like, what are you doing in here? So I'm gonna show you how to get out of here. I'm gonna show you an easier way to get out of here, and this is how you do it, you work a little bit at a time. And then all of a sudden, you both are out of that hole. And that's, a lot of times that's what it takes. And he was absolutely 100% correct in the sense that, one perfect example of that, Robin Williams. Did not want anybody to know what they were going through. Everybody knew he was going through bouts of depression, but they never saw it. He hid it well. And if he would have been open with somebody, he probably would still be around, which is the case with a lot of people who are going through episodes of severe depression or some type of self-harm like that. But we have to be willing to be able to recognize and say, hey, are you okay? A lot of time we get so caught up in our own little world that we don't take into consideration or forget that there are other people that are out there that may need our help.
We'll close on that note. Thank you again for all your help.